Good afternoon, everyone. I am Kia Cherise B. Patelo.
And I am Norlene M. Villarreña. We are the speakers for today.
Mr. Appleby was born on September 13, 1891, and he was an important American theorist of public administration in democracy. Mr. Appleby started his career as a newspaper publisher, and then he became an editorial writer at the Des Moines Register and Tribune from 1924 until 1928. When the family moved to Virginia in 1928, he became a newspaper publisher until he accepted a position on U.S. government. In 1947, Mr. Appleby became the dean of the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs in Syracuse University, where he became a noted author of works in the field of public administration.
According to Carl Brent Swisher in his recent book entitled The Growth of Constitutional Power in the United States, makes the point too often forgotten that the primary purpose of written constitutions, including our own, is to grant adequate power to govern.
It seems like in our generation, some of our politicians forgot to do their duty due to the fact that they are insatiable and blinded by power. They are no longer doing what they are supposed to do, and that is to make their platforms, to make an action, and to provide assistance and service to their constituents.
Consideration of administrative organization begins with the arrangements essential to authority and responsibility. The question is, why administrative organization begins with the arrangements of authority and responsibility?
A worker's degree of power is more noteworthy the higher they are in a various level structure. Wherever leadership is required, authority is also needed, because authority guarantees that everybody under the administrator's order will run after the association's objective or face discipline.
True and effective decentralization can only follow effective centralization.
Decentralization is the process by which the activities of an organization, particularly those regarding planning and decision-making, are distributed or delegated away from a central, authoritative location or group. Centralization refers to the process in which activities involving planning and decision-making within an organization. To sum up, decentralization will be only effective if the person that delegated by the authority has done his or her responsibility, and without harming the purpose and integrity of the enterprise as a whole.
Did you know that the cabinet members are the worst enemy of the president? Because they are more competitive than cooperative. Some of the cabinet members,
they are contending private interest, authority, esteem, and they dislike and oppose endeavors coordinated toward governmental integration. Moreover, once in a while, they may obstructing the president's proposition.
Good day everyone, my name is Darlene M. Villarreña, the reporter for Chapter 5, Organizing Around the Head of a Large Federal Department. We condemn the specific consideration of the form and utilization of departmental staffs. It should begin with thought about the nature of the policy and action to be served and developed. It therefore also has to do with the qualifications needed for high staff personnel. We very much want to breed in the levels around the Secretary and in all levels of staff serving the Secretary. The primary staff purpose is to help translate the specialized thinking, specialized policy, and specialized administration of departmental segments and individuals into public policy and public administration. Where there is a great tendency on the part of budget people to see all policy as budgetary policy or fiscal policy, all administration as budgetary control. So there is a similar tendency for attorneys to see all policy as legal policy. Also, a similar tendency for personnel officers to see all administration as administration for personnel. There is a tendency for economists to see all policy as economic policy. And last is, there is a tendency for politicians to see all policy as partisan policy or to see it in other narrowly political terms. All of these things are simply some of the aspects of public policy. Of all the terms used, the term political is the broadest and one of the most difficult for the more narrowly specialized to accept. Really sound and effective political policy comes very close to describing really sound and effective public policy. In general, understanding, however, the phrase has some connotations that drag its meaning to a lower level of abstraction. For the purposes of this paper, then let me minimize the truly, properly and necessarily political nature of both policy and administration by saying again that the staff function is to help translate narrower, more specialized thinking and action into terms that will enable the secretary in his sphere and auxiliary to the presidential function to develop and maintain truly public policy and truly public administration. If this is the staff function, it follows that no staff member specially responsible for specialized segment of the staff function should have dominance over the total staff function. This is to say that the budget officer, the director of administrative planning, the director of personnel, the solicitor, the economic advisor, the head of any economic policy group, and the head of any planning group, important as they all are, should be excluded from any position analogous to chief of staff. The professor believed that staff leader should be merely a chairman whose only preeminence is in his responsibility for staff cross-reference and synthesis. Of course, it follows that no staff leader should have a monopoly on the function of staff representation to the secretary. The preliminary purpose of the staff is to synthesize its product and the product of the bureaus. So, without explicit authority to do so, it does it within the limits fixed by an absence of authority. Beyond these limits, the staff purpose is to serve the authority of the secretary by providing him with perspective in terms of his interests, functions, and responsibilities. Reporting and recommending from their several vantage points, all at the secretarial level. They equip him with the various views and judgments from which, in connection with the reports and recommendations from bureau heads, and in the light of his dealings with the President, the Congress, and the public, he is enabled to arrive at the best judgment of which he is capable. There is a sharp controversy. One view world provide him with nothing more helpful than a picture of head-on collision. A three-dimensional view is a minimum for internal perspective. There is at least one important aspect to the limitations of the chairman of the Secretariat's staff. Chester I. Bernard, in the Functions of the Executive, indicates that all the executives reporting to a single executive should be as nearly as possible equal to each other, and that all of them together are roughly equal to their superior officer. So it may be that in some respects, all of the second-level executive are greater than the superior executive. They might, for example, by common action, easily ruin their chief. But in another respect, the superior executive ought to be equal to a little more than the sum of the next level executive parts. The staff at least certainly should not usurp the whole role of the principal executive, but since their function is based on his function, there is always some tendency toward usurpation. Staff plus bureau chiefs should equal a little less than the secretary, and staff minus bureau chiefs should equal a good deal less. The two military departments of our government have had a great part in developing the staff idea, but in recent years, they have appeared to me to have violated many basic principles of organizations and administrations. Neither of these departments has balanced departmental organization and in both. Staff and operation have been so combined as to minimize several secretarial functions. This latter situation constitutes a victory of the technician, the specialist, over the generalist, and results. Professor believe in less truly public policy. The staff should not usurp the role of the operating chiefs. The staff and the secretary together should definitely be superior to, greater than, and different from the sum of the operating chiefs. The chairman of the staff should be less than the whole staff, and of course less than the secretary. A few other thoughts I would suggest dogmatically as desirable rules. The staff should have collegial character, in which the principal discipline would be in the enforcement of cross-reference. The principal responsibility of the staff chairman should be this enforcement of cross-reference and as much synthesis as could be derived from it. So, no staff aid should have a function or field coextensive with that of a single bureau, and no staff organization should be permitted to get into an operating position where it is competitive with an operating agency. The regular staff function should not involve with the bureau judgment in the same terms, but review and anticipation in terms above the field of special bureau competence. Than this, the detailed arrangement for staff functions would go much beyond the purpose of this particular paper. Here began not the problems so involved with particular program situations, so in need of flexibility with which to meet changing conditions that they would require very detailed analysis. This is the kinds of activities by means of which a secretary does his job are surprisingly few. He sees people as an individual citizens, representatives of organized group, members of Congress, other national officials, state and local officials, party leaders, his own executives. He signs letters and orders, documents, he issues statements, makes speeches, testifies before congressional committees, see the press, he reads newspapers, get news and opinions reports, reads memoranda, reports, and recommendations. The staff organization needs to take account of all these things. For here is where confusion of integration takes place. These things involve the whole departmental policy and administration in secretarial terms. They suggest staff organization giving attention to these things like personnel selection and utilization, budgetary and financial management, interdepartmental and executive office relationships, general public relationships and information, coordination in terms of operating programs, administrative organization and practice, program development and planning, review of public papers, and lastly, the interviews and conferences. The management of these things in their interrelationship and in terms of the secretary's responsibilities is the business of departmental as distinguished from bureau personnel.